Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the overview. Today we're having a look at Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which came out on PC, on Steam, earlier this year, just on the tail end of January. I recognise that it is a PlayStation exclusive that's been ported across to PC as they want to do more and more, so it came out on the console like a year or two ago, and it got dragged through the ringer for all of its progressive stuff that's in there. And look, we'll talk about all this stuff. But generally speaking, remember, I'm not out to grind an axe. I don't really plant my flag ideologically. In fact, generally speaking, I'm just here to play good games and celebrate them and convey as best I can to you the merits of them. And unfortunately, when certain things are injected into a game, I will have to address them. So bear with me, I will try and be as even-handed as I possibly can. Having said all that, and despite the faults that are often paraded around about this game, overall, I really enjoyed this. It grew on me the more and more I played it. It was a bit of a personal journey in a way, sort of coming to grips with what the game was doing. I don't think it really helped itself in the first act. The second act was excellent and brilliant, and while the third was a little bit bloated, and again, there are certain aspects of the game that I reckon you could have cut entirely, like the Mary Jane component. I think the game would have been better served if she didn't even exist in the game, which would be weird, but that's one of the most glaring problems. But I don't want to focus on the problems because they aren't the focus of the experience. And I would put this to you before we get into it in earnest. Because I'm the same as you, I'm a normie, all this shit ends up in my YouTube feed as well, and it was very popular to just beat the shit out of this game for the problems with it. And I would wonder this, how many of the people that really dragged this game actually played it? Because I've beaten it, it's taken me just over 17 hours, but there's still plenty of side stuff to go back and do. But at the risk of sounding like I'm carrying water for the game, the king's share of my time with it was excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. And yes, those issues that are highlighted exist, they're glaring, but beyond all the clickbait clips that you've already seen floating around, that's about it. The other 80% of the game is fun. But again, like I said, we'll unpack all the bits and pieces. And if you're not across it, I'm doing an unusual format this year. It's a bit experimental. When I do these overviews, the hope is to do 100 of these over the course of a year and rank them from 1 to 100. They get a thumbnail score, which I'll change dynamically as we fill the list in. So at the time of this recording, I'm giving this game 95%, but while the list is still filling from the top down, what really matters is that I'm putting it between Foundation above it and Like a Dragon Yakuza below it. Both great games, and it's difficult to one-to-one compare to something like Foundation, for example, but Foundation is the king of what it's doing in its genre, and while Pirate Yakuza was an absolute romp and I loved it, it had some massive technical issues that kind of detracted from it, and overall I just feel like this Spider-Man game edges it out. Okay, if you're still with me, if you're still a reasonable person that hasn't decided that I'm the enemy because I'm hoping to actually assess this game fairly on its merits, let's delve deeper. This is coming out of Insomniac, and honestly, I haven't really checked in with them in a long time. I think they do Ratchet and Clank, which is a series that means nothing to me. They did the previous Spider-Man, which I barely played. I probably did like an overview on the channel, but even when I do overviews, often I don't really go into the AAA space that much. So I kind of went into this blind and fresh, first new experience with Spider-Man. However, having said that, I'd call myself a maney normie fan. I believe there was a Spider-Man action game on Dreamcast, which I loved, and that was really, really good. My Spider-Man is the Sam Raimi trilogy Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire ones. You can't really beat that. And there's a disconnect here. The way they're doing Spider-Man for the kids these days, like, I'm not necessarily going to be critical of it, but it's not my Spider-Man. Very tech-heavy. Very much taking a lot of what they did with the Marvel Tony Stark thing, and I actually find it to be sort of not creatively bankrupt, but they lean heavily on, I've got a spider bot for this, or I've got drones, or I've got this gadget, or I've got a UI in my suit, and it sort of turns into a, Iron Man Jr. way of dealing with a lot of the creative endeavors in this game. Why can I scan this? Why can I do that? Why do I have this drone? The answer all seems to come back to, because, technology and a black box explanation, which I don't particularly love. But again, I'm getting older. There's a newer generation. Maybe they really resonate with that sort of stuff. And look, before I leave the Insomniac thing behind, parts of this game really sort of make me a bit melancholy because I was a big fan of the Infamous series, which they did previously. And I'm not sure which cart leads what horse in that did they secure the ability to, do like Spider-Man sort of games through the showcasing of their original IP, which was Infamous. And if you're not across it, Infamous was essentially this, but it wasn't licensed Marvel stuff. And I really, really enjoyed it. Was his name Cole or whatever? His electricity powers. And they've introduced like a sort of glide suit, gliding, jumping squirrel sort of thing to this, which to me, I think is a bit of a stretch in the Spider-Man universe. But honestly, all that really made me do is go, oh my God, imagine if they actually made another Infamous game. Now, look, I might be in the minority and I'm just harkening back to the old days. But they did a reboot with the PS4 with Infamous Second Son, which was excellent. And a lot of really interesting, original superhero IP stuff. And I loved it. I like seeing new things. I'm like everyone else, I'm a bit sort of worn out on Marvel. And while they did an excellent job with all the Marvel aspects to this, like I said, you see flashes of brilliance coming through in what is broadly a pretty brilliant game mechanically. And I can't help but wonder, did they just build Infamous and it was part of the long plan to try and snatch the Marvel rights? Or maybe now that they're high flying, they could pivot, they could bring Infamous back. I don't really know the minds of the developers. Apparently they're working on a Wolverine game. I think that's sort of public knowledge these days. So that'll be interesting where they go there. But that's sort of the setup. These guys have a pedigree and a sort of a back catalogue of doing this sort of stuff. And, in a way, Spider-Man does seem like a pretty organic place to take this development house and, their background with Infamous. A lot of people sort of position it as kind of a successor to the Rocksteady Batman sort of games. I can see that, right? Or a competitor or what have you. You got to be careful with that comparison because I feel like as a Rocksteady boy that really enjoyed the Batman games, we're not even going to talk about Suicide Squad and how that's currently causing Warner Brothers to reap what they sowed, and it's just ravaging studios. But I feel like a lot of people may have issues with this game, and perhaps the first game, and again, I've totally missed any discourse around either of them because I just haven't. I've not played them. But I feel like if you go into this trying to play it like a Batman game, you might have some difficulties because while it's got some inspirations and it's doing something similar, I would argue I was playing the game wrong for a big chunk of it. In fact, let's jump into that straight away. So there are two major aspects that didn't click with me until probably halfway through my playtime. And then when the penny dropped, I started having infinitely more fun. And that would be the traversal and the combat, arguably the two core components of the game. So you got Spider-Man bloody swinging around, and for the longest time, I felt like something was missing. I didn't understand why I'd be incentivized to do sort of big swings through the air or anything like that, and the min-max in me actually found that if I go very low to the ground, because the game doesn't seem to want to let you crash or fail, to the point where even I was crossing lava in one of the side missions or something, and you could just sit still and bounce on the lava. It wouldn't let me hit the ground, which in the early time playing this just sort of added more and more to a kind of negative pushback I was having in my early impressions. But I'm glad I shook that off and I don't want to digress. But I just found going low to the ground as fast as possible, just spamming swing, would get you the best locomotion across the city. That's how I started seeing it, right? And it wasn't until I checked the achievement list out of just curiosity. And there was an achievement that everyone had called Splat, and it was where you could crash mid-trick, which to me I couldn't comprehend because it seemed the game made it impossible for you to crash Spider-Man. So I had to look into it, and it turns out that there's a trick button, and look, either the game had a brief pop-up that I missed, or it's assuming knowledge from the first game, and this was a feature in the previous games that came across, but like I said, as a normie off the street coming in, I must have blinked or looked away, and I missed a core mechanic to this game And I didn't even realize that one of the face buttons that you could hold down and you could basically do like a light Tony Hawk kind of trick thing. And as soon as I realized that, it changed the traversal entirely. All of a sudden, swinging, doing big swings all the way up into the sky and building speed and then trying to squeeze as many bloody 720 spins in as possible before you hit the ground. It changed the way that I moved through the city. All of a sudden, I didn't really care so much about going fast because I was getting XP points that all add to the RPG-like system. And I even started seeing the world differently. Like, in my mind, I'd already been building up a little bit of a pitch that it was reminding me of like an F1 game, right? Because you're just sort of moving through the world so fast through locomotion that you don't really care much about the side city, and it all sorts of blurs together. I kind of started seeing how cool the city was as I started engaging with this trick thing. So look, this might just me being an absolute idiot missing this system, but I don't know why I would expect it. So it could be either way. It could be that I just had really bad luck and missed it, or maybe at a developmental level they made a few assumptions that were off the mark. Jumping across to combat. Now, combat never really clicked with me in the beginning. Again, similar theory. I was doing something wrong. This was more of an epiphany. The game never explicitly explained it to me. I feel like it could be to blame for a lot of the action Souls-like type games that I play. Like, I'm a very dodge build kind of dude. Don't really tank hits. I don't really counter in a lot of action combat games. I generally spend it all on iframes. And in the first half of this game, and I don't know how much we're going to give away, we'll try not to be too spoilery, but there's this villain called Craven, and he's got an army of, I don't know, the Craven and the Cravenettes. Such a dumb name, by the way, for a hunter, right? He's supposed to be brave and fearless, and Craven literally means fucking coward. But I don't want to mess with that because I think he's probably been in Spider-Man for like 50 years or something. But you find his little army of Cravens, and so many of them shoot you from a distance. And I felt like as I was moving around and trying to engage with the sort of action combat, which at first blush is a Rocksteady system, you've got punches, you've got counters, that sort of thing. But these guys were constantly sort of spacing out, and I was constantly zipping to them to stop them shooting me. And it was just an unpleasant experience of sort of cat and mouse chasing around the map. And like I said, I had a bit of an epiphany that moving around is not really how you're supposed to fight. You're supposed to be a bit more static, which arguably is probably how Batman is, if I think back to it. And I feel like maybe I've just been conditioned to be more mobile in a lot of these sort of third-person perspective type games. So once I realized that you kind of almost, during combat, you don't use the left thumbstick, or you shouldn't. Well, who am I to say what you should and shouldn't do? But for maximum enjoyment, stop trying to move around and circle strafe and Dark Souls combat these dudes. And then it all sort of started falling into place. I started actually shooting my webs. That was something I was barely doing. I was pretty much just doing the Rocksteady punch combo, that sort of thing. And then once I realized that you sort of stand still, the main reason you use your webs, because they feel kind of low impact. You got to pound a dude with like 5 webs or whatever to even sticky him up to do something. And even then, all that does is buy you a few punches. But what it actually does, it builds towards like this sort of combo charge system where you can do an execute a la Batman type games, or you can use a heal. And it's pretty much the way to build charge to be able to heal. And it was one of those things, I was like, I can never heal. Like, I was having a tough time in the beginning, but the long and short, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on my incompetence as a gamer here, but generally speaking, I found that, yeah, you have to play this game on its terms. But I feel like, in a way, my own gaming credentials, or whatever I'm conditioned to do, were actually getting in the way. I wasn't trying to stubbornly play this like a Dark Souls game, but I feel like, I don't know, man, somehow it could have been a bit more explicit in laying out that there is a way you're supposed to play this game, and maybe the way you naturally want to play it as a normie gamer isn't it. So yeah, I stopped moving around. I started countering much more. The game really rewards, it's got a back-to-front counter-dodge system. I don't have to go into it because I've already spent too much time, but what your intuition would be, perhaps block, counter, and then dodge being secondary. It's the other way around. The dodge is easier and earlier on the telegraph, whereas the block is later. And the game makes it pretty clear that there are certain things you're supposed to counter and certain things that you're supposed to dodge. So that's my advice. Maybe you've made it this far into this video and you've been frustrated with the combat yourself. Stop moving with the left thumbstick. Start shooting with the, right bumper or whatever it is. Start shooting your webs a lot more. You're going to really enjoy the game much, much more. Anyway, so those are actually sort of the main core of the game. It is a open world environment. I haven't even talked about the graphics or anything like that. It is brilliant. It looks beautiful, like $1,000,000. The fidelity is phenomenal. It's actually wild. Having a look at all the suits and, I don't know what you call them, but Paul Mark's equivalent, the textures on the suits at a very small level. It's pretty incredible. It kind of makes New York look shit in a way, because it's all just boring tenements. No offense, New York, or anything like that. I'm sure if you took a bird's eye view of a highly realized version of one of my cities, like Melbourne or Sydney, you're probably going to have the same effect. It almost feels a little bit wasted in a way. I found that when I was engaging with the side content, I was having the least amount of fun. A lot of it is very cookie cutter gamey stuff. Between some main missions, it would sort of force me to do one or two side missions, which I didn't mind. That was fine. But once I started treating this game more like, what's a good example? I reviewed the Mafia Definitive Edition game like a couple of years ago, and it still sticks in my mind as a game that sort of parades as an open world, but doesn't really let you go open world. You sort of just go from mission to mission, and you're moving through what feels like an open city world. And that city's there, but it is actually kind of bland. You're not really incentivized. In fact, in that game, I don't want to get off track too much, but just bear with me. In that game, there isn't really side content. You kind of just go from main mission to main mission, but they've built this peripheral world in such detail that it's enough, that it makes you feel immersed. And I feel like, in a way, that's maybe how they should have done this. I don't really care about going around and collecting fucking drones or flying through obstacle courses and doing all this busy work shit that is padding. I'm happy to just go from main story quest to main story quest, which is what I started doing. And the game's pacing complemented that as well. And that's when it really became fun. Second act on, I was so hooked. Especially going into boss battles, they really started to ramp the boss battles at the midway mark, and they are the best part of this game, and they are all excellent, and they are fun. The combat was just really great. So, as soon as you sort of just treated this like the Mafia game and start playing the main missions and not really doing side crap, just moving through the world in your periphery, this is excellent. It's so fun. Now, this also had a compounding positive effect, I suppose you could say, because a lot of the side missions, again, I'm not immune to the controversial stuff. I don't know. Apparently, there's one where you help some gay dude date his boyfriend or ask him out or whatever. I never saw it, never did it. And it wasn't like I was going out of my way looking for it or hiding from it. Things like gay flags and Black Lives Matter stuff and all that, all these hot topics. And I'm not saying anything either way, right? None of this crap was ever in my game. I never saw any of it. I'm sure it's there, right? And I'm sure if you really want to go looking for trouble or looking for affirmation, you'll find it, right? But my point is that when I just engaged this game as it was, playing the main story and dabbling in some side stuff, it was really fun. It was a really good experience, and none of this crap was in my face. That's just my honest take on my experience with it personally. And look, since I'm brushing up against controversy, let's just do it now. Shall we? Let's rip the Band-Aid. There are some performative things in here, and I do my best to, I don't want to speculate too much. I don't want to assume too much. I try really hard to give people their day. For example, some of the side stuff that you do is like taking photos and engaging with what you would probably call modern city New York culture. And a lot of it I find eye-rolling, taking photos of people at protests. There was a mission I was doing for Miles, because you've got the two Spider-Mans, where he was trying to recover some bloody specific jazz drum from some black musician. And a lot of this shit to me comes across as fairly performative. When you impose that against what I like in these sort of games, I still carry a torch for a lot of the Assassin's Creed games, because in their side stuff, they will have things like museum references and photographs of pottery from that time period. Like it's kind of an educational tool. And I find that learning about ancient civilizations and their culture to be much more interesting and engaging. I don't really give a shit about taking a photograph of two bums playing chess in the park. Having said that, I also recognize they're both kind of covering the same thing. One's just modern, and it's probably through a more progressive lens as opposed to a sort of speculative digging up ancient ruins. Here's some plates we found. I wonder what they were about. So I'm willing to give it a pass on that. Like, it's fleshing out its city with these things that it finds interesting as culture, but I actually think I accidentally hit a nail on the head there. Like, bear with me on this. I don't think it's unfair to say that this studio, most AAA game studios, very much will lean in that progressive mindset, that progressive world view. Like, I think you can treat that as fact. I also feel like this dev, through that lens, have actually earnestly tried to create a balanced game, right? And from that, I feel like for the most part, it's quite palatable and accessible for someone to me. Like, if you really want to put me in a fucking box, I'm fairly centrist. I'm issues based, right? You come to me with an issue and you go, hey, what do you think about this? I'll just give you my answer. I don't really fancy myself beholden to any sort of worldview. I'm a normie. So a lot of the time, this stuff seems fairly innocent, but it does sort of creep through to have this finger on the scales kind of progressive bias. And this is shown so very clearly through the Mary Jane character. And I will throw in my quick little bit of speculation. More and more, I feel like this is the case, that you have a studio of these like-minded people, and they don't seem to have recourse for someone to say, hey, Mike from management, this is why your idea is shit. You shouldn't deform Mary Jane's head for these reasons, right? I don't know if they necessarily ever hear this feedback at any point during their production or anything like that, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the really skilled dudes on the tools making all these models and textures probably feel and think this way, but their environment doesn't allow for them to challenge management, which is such a tragedy, because I feel like if some of this more extreme or biased shit was curbed, I feel like they could have done a lot better with the game. But again, that gets into pretty speculative territory. It could be any reason, right? They could be exactly what the other side tells you, evil demon people with an agenda that's trying to destroy everyone, and it's all propaganda. And I don't know, man. I honestly just think it might be an echo chamber of yes men, and it's not much more complicated than that. But the Mary Jane character, it does feel like she was written by someone different, right? Or like maybe they've cordoned the work off. And like more than anything else in this game, it feels like a separate piece of work product from everything else. It's actually quite striking. And while I don't necessarily want to get into spoilers, it is a Swiss cheese, right? There's 5, 6, 7 examples, and it will get more and more spoilery as the story goes on, and there are aspects to her character, but they always come back to this root cause that she seems to be a vehicle for massive insecurity over the fact that she ultimately is a secondary character in what is a Spider-Man story. I don't think it's news to anyone to realize that Mary Jane is just a damsel to be rescued. She is one-dimensional. That's how superhero stories go, because they're about the superhero and the trials and tribulations of being the hero, much like enemies are the foil to the superhero. It doesn't have to really be much more complex than that, but time and time again, whether it's mechanically, like they kind of turn her into a bit of a, you do side quests as her, and they've given her like a stun gun, and it is ludicrous to the point where she's taking down 6-foot-tall mercenary men with a single stun, and later on she's taking on like monsters, and it turns into a COD third-person sort of game where you're shooting these dudes and one-tapping them, and you kind of ask yourself, why doesn't Spider-Man have this gun? Because it's more effective than him. To the point where a lot of sparring, a lot of the conflict between her and Peter is about how she's not appreciated, and it's trying to make the scales even between him saving fucking thousands of people a day in the city and her trying to write books that no one will buy. And it's just embarrassing. It really is. It makes me kind of feel sorry for whoever wrote this character, and it makes more sense when you realize if that's how they see the world and they have such an axe to grind, no wonder they must hold some sort of sway in the studio, and they've really bullied this character into the limelight. You can sort of see the dog with a bone just not wanting to let go of it. And then you look at her face and it's wild, man, because you have what I would call beautiful characters on both sides, no homo. But like all the lads look good. Miles looks great, Black Cat is in this and she's beautiful. And I don't know, man, like it's easy to just go, they did a Matt Damon Team America and they accidentally, spasticated Mary Jane's face when they put it through the machine. But I really don't think it's that. It's intentional, and I cannot for the life of me understand why you would make her so large chin and ugly, other than I feel like they're modeling it after someone or some sort of idea or principle of what's pretty. And again, circling back to my point before, there was no one around to tell them, hey, what you're doing is dumb, you're captured, maybe you've got this idea of what Mary Jane should look like and it's wrong. And again, like I said, whoever was in charge of the Mary Jane department obviously had absolute final cut and just did not get checked on any of this. And it's kind of jarring, it's striking. Because here's the other thing, right? You got bloody Miles in here. Now, there's aspects of Miles that I think are really dumb, that smell like a white liberal woman seeing and addressing racism through her world lens. It feels less about sort of equality for all and general representation and more about, well, the way that we're going to make those black guys feel equal to the white guys. Well, the white guys have a Spider-Man, so let's give the black guys a Spider-Man. It's like, why don't we just have one that appeals to everybody? Oh, no. We can't have that mixing nonsense. Can't have that. That's what this feels like. It really feels like some out-of-touch hero complex Karen from HR implementing their idea of what the black kids want. And parts of Miles is just kind of, it's embarrassing. I don't really want to comment on American culture or anything like that, but like so many of his costumes are just extreme character stereotypes of, well, this is what the hip hop youth like, with runners and puffy jackets and all that. It's like, how do we make Spider-Man as black stereotype as we can? It's pretty wild, actually. And then, Miles's peripheral personality is he wants to be a bloody DJ, and they've got a mini game in a Mysterio mind thing. I mean, spoilers, I guess, but you have to fucking DJ Hero match things. And I'm like, I really do wonder if you're just some normal black American dude, you look at this shit and go, fuck, this is embarrassing. This is how they, the affluent white ladies of America, this is how they see you. On your own special black bus that doesn't mix with the white bus, and you can have your black Spider-Man and all the stereotypes as we see it. So, look, that's probably the last that I'll say on it. Other than, it's weird, man. It's weird as someone who's not American to have a look at this shit. And once again, apparently being black in America is another 5-layered checkbox. And if you check all those boxes, huzzah. That's your black character. Now, having said all that, I really like Miles. I think he's kind of interesting. I think, actually, it's not a pissing contest, but by and away, he blows Peter out of the water. There is a Venom component to this story, and I think the voice actor, it could be the direction or anything like that, and I don't want to personally go after voice actors, but whoever's voicing Peter, I don't think he has the range to do what they try to do. If you've seen anything with Venom ever in it, it's about him letting his darker side, and sort of a bit of a descent into madness and then pulling back from the edge. I don't think this is news to anyone. He doesn't really do angry very well. He sort of does growling cuck, and it's laughable, right? So, again, I'm not trying to shit on him too much, but I do feel like the range demanded of him wasn't met. Who can really say how that happened? So Peter's not the greatest character, and his miso also quite terrible. But yeah, Miles is interesting, really cool. He has this back and forth, even though he's absolutely the B character in this story. What he has is really interesting. He has this back and forth with this dude, Mr. Negative. I'd have to look him up. I've never heard of him. This cool looking bloody Asian superhero that inverts colors and that. And he steals the show. He is probably the second best character in the entire game is Mr. Negative, and his whole arc But, you know, he has this backstory and a back and forth with Miles and because he's killed his dad or something. Again, I totally know nothing about any of these characters. But so Miles and Mr. Negative and their interplay and as characters together are fucking really good. They're show stealers. It sort of shines a light on some of the main shit being so weak. And, you know, to show you that I'm not a progressive hater or anything like that, like Miles has a deaf girlfriend that he signs with and that. And I don't know, she wants to be some street artist. I think that maybe that's a bridge too far, right? But he wants to ask her out on a date, and the back and forth of that is actually quite subdued and quite wholesome, and I enjoyed it, right? He's got his own little sidekick, bloody best mate who's nothing, but, you know, his interplay with this chick, really cool. His mum has a very small part in it, but she's awesome as well. So, like, the whole family unit and story dynamic of Miles is fucking the best part of this game. It's really good. Well, second best. We'll get to the first best, and before we jump, I'll say this as well. I was digging through the accessibility options because, you know, I hate myself because it's ridiculous. Half the options these days are about, you know, make dudes bright orange because why? Well, we know why, actually. It's because they want to get awards from some sort of end of the year on accessibility options bullshit. It's performative. It's got nothing to do with actual accessibility. But I found one which I thought would be a bit of a giggle to turn on, which is that the deaf girl doesn't actually have voice acting by default, but you can turn it on. And you know, the cheeky childish part of me thought this might be funny. Honestly, it's infinitely better. And again, I don't want to speculate too much. The video is going on long and long and long, but I wonder why they turned it off by default. Much like Avowed turned off pronouns in your character sheet by default, like there's sort of this concession of defeat, this sort of we get it, right? They're showing their hand that they understand, and I feel like they've turned off her voice acting because people are going to go, no, 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 and they're just going to shit can her. And it's to avoid controversy, where I'm telling you, when I turned it on for the worst reasons, and I left it on all the way through because it actually added more character to her as opposed to this weird static signing character that the mics just go silent while she's having her moment. So I'd say turn that on and have an open mind. That actually, to me, made it kind of complete. Anyway, the best character of the story, the main character, is, what's his name? Osborn. Not Norman, though Norman, his dad, in this, exceptional. A tormented, guilt-ridden dude that means well. They're obviously setting him up to be Norman Osborn, Green Goblin or whatever. But in this, he's great. But Harry is an absolute show stealer. He has all the arc, and I won't give it away because it's not traditional. It's not Goblin, but he is the best part of this by a country mile, and he puts just about everyone he inhabits the frame with to shame, and it's just light and day. From whatever they've done with the mocap with the actor, to the acting, to the directing, to the writing, everything about him is an absolute show stealer. And look, part of me kind of feels like I should sort of ruminate on that a little bit longer, but whatever. I feel like this is probably the longest video I've ever done, and I kind of want to wrap it up. But I think I've covered my main points. This game is best played as an almost boss rush, single-player, main story only thing. And again, like I said, I clocked it in 17 hours with some side stuff along the way. And the truth of it is, I might go back and clean it up and do achievement hunting and all that, and it won't ruffle my feathers quite as much, the egregious side activist shit, because I know that I just really enjoyed the main story and that. The combat gets really tough. I feel like maybe because I mainlined it a bit much, I was a bit under-leveled. Some of the boss fights go on way too long towards the end. I'm not going to name specific things, but like I said, the King's share of boss fights are really, really cool. I think Kraven the Hunter is an interesting idea, not executed super well. He sort of like goes around trying to find a monster to kill him. You know, a worthy opponent. We've seen this sort of stuff, but at the same time, he's got an army of dudes that captures and subdues people, and then he fights them. So there's an internal inconsistency that I couldn't quite shake, and he becomes a bit of a nothing character. Venom is pretty fucking rad. And yeah, I think I've covered it. I think it's a great game. I think there are problems with it, and I think if you are so ideologically activated, weaponized, aware, whatever you want to call it, that you would sleep on this game because it personally offends you from the clips that you've seen from people that honestly are just farming you, man. They never played the game. They got the clip from someone else, and then they bang their drum about how offensive this game is. All the shit that they're saying is true. All those things are in it. That doesn't change the fact that the other 90% of the time, this is a really good game. And I would say wishlist it, pick it up on sale easily, especially if you're, apprehensive to jump in and trust me fully at my word. As someone who personally really dislikes all this shit being pushed into games, I'm not afraid to call it out. That also comes with the caveat that I have to be fair and balanced, and I can't help but tell you, this was an excellent experience. I really fucking loved it, and I'm super glad I gave it the time of day. Anyway, this has gone on really long. Team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I will catch you guys on the next one.